Thank you, everyone, for coming. My name is Kimberly Saul, and I am the co-chair for Design for Risk and Reconstruction Committee. And tonight's panel is co-hosted by the DFRR Committee and the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. As climate change continues to reshape our cities, few places feel the impact more directly than New York's waterfront. Tonight's panel on the waterfront, infrastructure, resiliency, and transportation brings together architects and designers who are reimagining how the city protects and connects its coastline for the future. Through their work on major coastal resiliency and infrastructure projects across the city, our panelists will explore how design innovation, engineering, and community engagement are shaping a more adaptive and inclusive waterfront. Together, these perspectives will help us see how New York is turning the pressure of climate change into an opportunity for innovation, rethinking not just how we defend the coastline, but how we live with it. Our moderator tonight is Josh DeFlorio from Arup. He works at the intersection of transportation, climate, and community. Formerly, Josh was the Chief of Resiliency and Sustainability at the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey. Josh is bringing his experience in advancing climate adaptation and infrastructure planning across the region, and he will be guiding us through the conversation tonight. So please welcome Josh to the stand.
Great, thank you, Kimberly. Can you hear me? Excellent. Is everybody awake? Good start. See a lot of black turtlenecks in the audience, so I know I'm hanging out with architects. I am a planner by training and vocation, so thanks so much for the opportunity to hang out with you this evening. As Kimberly said, I'm Josh DeFlorio. I'm a principal at Arup, which is a global engineering and sustainable development consultancy. But before that, I was Chief Resilience and Sustainability at the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey for a decade. Had the opportunity to work with my valued colleague, Russ Kriegel here. Thanks so much for looping me into this event. And yeah, in that decade journey, as you might imagine, I started in 2015, so that was 3 years after Sandy. So at the beginning, at the onset of that tenure, I was working primarily on the Sandy, basically the Sandy repair and recovery and resilience projects. But in about 2020, 2021, we pivoted to start looking a bit more proactively at resilience, and actually that culminated in development of a proactive resilience capital plan. And I'm very much hoping, although I can't confirm, that the Board of Commissioners will put out just such a plan during the board meeting tomorrow. Russ, maybe you have some intel on that, but I am eagerly awaiting the preliminary plan, the full capital plan, but also the proactive resilience capital plan. So I will try to be brief here. Kimberly, your introduction was excellent, and I think provided us with all the framing remarks that we need. I guess I was glibly going to say, if you are here for the classic Elia Kazan film On the Waterfront, you're going to be sorely disappointed. But probably it's screening at Film Forum just down the street. But if you are here to hear from 3 practitioners who are at the forefront, who are involved in delivery of major coastal resilience projects that are going to impact New York City for generations to come, you're in the right place. So I will read their bios all at once, and then I will invite, and I'll also give you your learning objectives, because there's 1.5 learning units that are conferred by this session. I, as a planner, will have to self-report for those, but I think they're going to be more pro forma for you. So, as I said, tonight's program will bring together 3 influential voices to discuss how New York City is actively building and reimagining its waterfront for a more resilient future. So they are in order: Matt Potter, who is a project manager at HNTB. So Matt will offer an in-depth look at the Eastside Coastal Resiliency Project, one of the most ambitious climate adaptation efforts in the country. Drawing from his extensive experience with Envision and Wedge, which I greatly appreciate since sustainability was also part of my remit at the Port Authority, Matt will walk us through the core principles behind raising the land, reconfiguring infrastructure, and mapping new public spaces, all while enhancing overall quality of life in vulnerable neighborhoods. Next, Matt Stout, Office for the Next Environment, will present a comprehensive view of the FIDI Seaport Resiliency Initiative, highlighting how large-scale flood protection measures are integrated with transportation networks, public spaces, and urban ecology. So you can expect insights into the look and the feel of these new infrastructure elements, from terrace planting zones and garden design to seawalls and access pathways, and how these features contribute to a cohesive aesthetic and functional urban edge. And last but not least, Ryan Connolly of Thomas Pfeiffer and Partners TPP will explore how resiliency challenges are driving formal innovation in architectural design. So his discussion will center around the replacement of an existing waterfront building with a newly elevated structure, revealing how issues like flood risk, material sustainability, and design aesthetics, such as the use of sustainable concrete and thoughtful color palettes, are being woven into the project from the ground up. So that sounds exciting to me. So we'll hear from each of them approximately 10 minutes ahead, and then we will move into about a half hour or so of discussion before we turn to your questions for our remaining time. Our anticipated end time is about 75 minutes from now, so we'll try to keep it tight. Before I cede the mic to Matt Potter, because this session confers those 1.5 learning units, can I hear some applause again? Here are our learning objectives. So after attending the program, you should be able to describe how model programs such as Envision and Wedge promote enhanced user experience of infrastructure resiliency projects. You should understand how some major flood control and infrastructure programs in New York City are organized and administered. Explain the architecture and engineering strategies employed in order to protect and rebuild urban transportation infrastructure assets, such as roadways, subways, bridges, and buildings, and discuss how flood control and mitigation strategies impact the visual appearance and form of the city. So that's it from me until the moderated questions. Matt Potter, I invite you to the podium.
Thanks, Josh. As mentioned, I'm a project manager at HNTB and the Envision and Wedge lead on the New York City Department of Design and Construction East Side Coastal Resiliency Project, or ESCR for short. So just background, as Josh mentioned Sandy. So Hurricane Sandy, as we all know, occurred in October of 2012, over 10 years ago. The storm was very damaging to the tri-state area, causing over $19 billion in damages to New York City alone, and approximately 2 million people in that area without power, and nearly 90,000 buildings were affected. So similar to that cover image that I had, we could see much of Manhattan, especially the Lower East Side, is without power. So this then led to the need for the Lower Manhattan Coastal Resiliency Project, and the first section of this project is ESCR. So the storm, as Josh mentioned, affected Manhattan pretty severely, and the NYCHA housing and these communities, the East River Park itself, near the Williamsburg Bridge, you can see in the bottom left, and then the FDR, pretty heavily covered in water on the bottom right. So before I get into the design overview, I just want to give thanks and credit to the large project team that we have. This is a massive project. I am by no means the lone designer or anything. I'm part of the construction management team of HNTB Leroy Hill. You can see on the left, we have large stakeholders from the city, our design team led by AKRF, and then our 2 construction contractors for the 2 project areas that make up the project program. So the ESCR project ranges from East 25th Street all the way down to Montgomery Street. The main goals of the project and the program are to provide a reliable flood protection system with minimal use of coastal structures such as roller gates and swing gates, improve the waterfront open access and access to these spaces, and quickly respond to the urgent need for flood protection and resiliency in the Lower East Side. So the site is 2.4 miles long, so it's now all protected under one program. Project area, so you'll hear me talk about Project Area 1 and Project Area 2. So Project Area 2 is to the north, so that's plan right, and that's in gold, and that contains more of the active flood measures, such as flood walls and flood gates, as well as 3 parks. And then Project Area 1, so that's the larger East River Park that runs from approximately East 15th Street all the way down to Montgomery Street, and that's the new raised East Park itself. And there's also several gates to the south. So speaking of raising the park, So the existing esplanade, previous esplanade, was 8 feet. The new design elevation will be 16.5 feet, which is above the freeboard and wave requirement on the high end of the 2050 FEMA projection. So that's what the diagram on the right is showing. This new elevation is being accomplished by the fill in the East River Park and the gates, and I'll show construction photos of these in a few slides. So just the high level future condition of the new park. So with the number 1, so that's those active measures I was mentioning, is the flood walls and flood gates. So that's in project area 2 to the north. And then we have several in project area 1 to the south. The elevated park itself, so that's in green, number 2, the raised parkland, getting to that 16.5 feet. And then we also have interior drainage and below ground flood protection, such as a buried flood wall and seepage barrier. And that's the orange line running from project area 1 all the way, where the project area 1, project area 2 demarcation is, all the way down to the flood walls in the south by Montgomery Street. So just a diagrammatic section quickly showing the existing and the new. So in the existing section, water going obviously into Lower East Side, and then the new park. So the new park, we have buried flood protection, and then I'll show a lot of construction images of the barging. So we brought in fill. A lot of the construction is done from the barge, so it's minimizing trips, truck trips, and then disrupting communities with these truck trips along the FDR. So I'm going to quickly go through a rendering flyover just so everyone can get their bearings. These are a little bit dated, so if you see something that's not there, it might have changed, but just to give everyone an idea. So I'll go through starting to the south at project area 1. So we have the new Corlier's Hook Park Bridge, the new embayment, preserved fire boathouse, and the Delancey Street Bridge. That's open. I'll show that also in a couple slides. And then moving up from the Williamsburg Bridge, we have a series of new courts and fields, Houston Street, crossing fields 3 and 4, and a new track and field house, which is, I think, now open to the public. And then moving up farther along project area 1 by the track and East 10th Street. So we have new track and field areas, new track house, maintenance yard, comfort station. And that's the end of project area 1. So now project area 2 has those 3 parks that I was mentioning, and then the flood wall and floodgates. So now I'll get into the construction progress of the park. So we'll just work our way back down from project area 2, and then we'll go back down to the south. So project area 2 was started in the fall of 2020 and is now substantially complete as of last fall. So this includes 3 parks: Asser Levy Playground, Stuyvesant Cove Park, Murphy Brothers Playground, and had a total budget of $163 million, but we completed it $10 million below budget and ahead of schedule. Some construction highlights now, and there's many for both of these project areas, but I'll just try to keep it to the most impactful ones. So for PA2, we have a flood wall. It's a textured flood wall above and below grade. It has over 3,000 linear feet, and it runs through the parks and under the FDR. It also has moldings along the floodgates that show the different sea elevations. And for the roller gates in PA2, we have 12 very large swing and roller gates. So these will remain primarily in an open condition. They'll be tested once a year where they'll close it, make sure everything's working, and they'll only obviously be closed during a flood surge event. And of course, the completed parks and playgrounds in PA2. So this one is Stuyvesant Cove Park. So they can see the flood wall, vegetation, and seating along the esplanade. So now moving farther south back into PA1, project area 1. It starts at East 15th Street and runs down to Montgomery Street. So we started this in fall of 2021. Projection completion right now is end of 2026. So it includes 3 bridges, the park raising, new amenities that I previously showed on that rendering flyover, and a total budget of $1.27 billion. And this is the largest infrastructure project ever managed by DDC. So moving on to some construction highlights from PA1. So that work being done from the East River. You can see the fill operation on the right. So the team will be bringing in, and has brought a lot of this in already, 1.1 million tons of clean fill. And this will get us up to that new 16.5 foot elevation, and again, reducing those truck trips along the FDR. The new esplanade along the East River. also being done via barge. And this is one of the key sustainability features that we're using in the Envision rating system. This is all precast risers now, also being done from the river. But this would reduce 1,600 truck trips of concrete if we were to cast in place, which originally was supposed to be done, and we ended up value engineering and using precast risers. And then one of the new pedestrian bridges, so this is the Delancey Street Bridge. So this was fabricated in Italy, and it was shipped by barge to New York City, and it was installed last fall overnight in one night. No disruptions, or minimal, I wouldn't say no disruptions, minimal disruptions to the community and the FDR. And of course, the park itself. So one of the big commitments of the entire program is to have sections of the park always open to the community. So the project is in phase where sections are open. So in this picture, you can see the Delancey Street Bridge and lawn, the open basketball courts, and then on the other side of the Williamsburg Bridge is the new tennis courts. And then we had an inaugural community grilling this May. So moving on into the rating systems. So the project received, and this is my main portion of the project. I was primarily involved as the Envision and Wedge sustainability professional on the project, and it's still ongoing. Let's jump to that real quick. So Esker received the initial gold award for Envision. So that's the award on the left in the summer of 2022. So we used a forensic application, meaning we implemented this at 95% design completion. So we started that process in fall of 2019, and it's went through many iterations. Envision has 64 credit cover sheets, and we were able to achieve 414 points and applicable 944 points. So we're still going through the construction document collection process. We have about 10 credits that are in the construction phase that we'll resubmit to get our final award at project completion. And just after the Envision award, the project received the Wedge award in the fall of 2022. And we were able to use a lot of the Envision credit cover sheets to do the Wedge sheets. And we quickly put together the Wedge application in about 6 months. So we got the Wedge verified award. Wedge is just pass-fail. So we were able to also get accolades for that on the project. I'll quickly highlight just some of the credits that really stand out for us to get maximum points on the rating system. So one of the goals of Esker and the LMCR project is to improve the quality of life. So how did we achieve this credit? We had a robust community engagement process, and we used the environmental impact statement for a lot of the credits. That was really probably our Bible for getting a lot of the credits, as well as the construction drawings. And then, of course, the improved overall protection and enjoyment as seen in the improved access recreational opportunities for community along the park and the East River. And speaking of the community, the project also excelled in combining flood protection and a new park. So this is achieved by our new connections along the FDR with they're more direct. It's not just going up and over. It's more, if you're at that height of the bridge, you're going right into the park. We had an enhanced pedestrian cyclist path that's going through it. And then the main goal of the project, which is that flood protection and resilience, the integration of the raised park, the flood walls, the gates, the below-grade flood protection, the reconstruction of water and sewer infrastructure. And Esker could have just been a wall, but it shows that we can do flood protection, community spaces can be a common goal. And that's it. So thank you, everyone, for your time and the opportunity to present this massive, great project to you.
Thanks, Matt. Can everyone hear me okay? My name is Matthew Stout from Office for the Next Environment. I'll be presenting to you the Financial District and Seaport Climate Resilience Plan. I'll also note that our firm is the architect of record for the Esker flood wall that you saw there. So if you have any comments or criticisms about the wavy form wall patterning, you can direct those to me. I'm proud to present a quite ambitious plan for Lower Manhattan that is really, first just want to acknowledge that it really takes a city to build a city, and that this is really the culmination of several years of planning work with several contracts, several contractors, several designers involved. Now we are at concept level design, And I'll walk you through some of those ideas. So right now we're looking at the tip of Lower Manhattan. We just talked about the East Side Coastal Resiliency Project, which is in the top right corner. And the Fide Seaport area is highlighted in the bottom, which is essentially from the Battery to the Brooklyn Bridge. Most of the waterfront that you see in Lower Manhattan in this image is either under construction or about to be. But this area particularly has been taking longer for the planning work because of its complexity due to the transportation infrastructure and other elements along the waterfront that I'll talk about. So again, the project area is from the Battery to the Brooklyn Bridge. And you can see in this diagram, this is really a host of all kinds of transportation infrastructure for the city. While not noted on this diagram, there are 5 subway tunnels that move underneath the East River here, and 3 ferry terminals. And so as sea level rises, the analysis shows that much of this waterfront will be impacted by frequent tidal inundation by 2050s. So that's the area in magenta there. So we're talking about the Wall Street, Pier 11 ferry terminal, the downtown Manhattan heliport, and Pier 16, as well as Esplanade. Most critically, to the southern end of the project area, the Battery Maritime Building, where the Governor's Island Ferry currently exists, that will be inundated on a regular basis by the 2050s, as well as Whitehall Ferry Terminal between the 2050s and the 2080s. So this was the real challenge for this project, is to really find a solution that integrates flood defense and also thinks forwardly about all of these transportation assets along the waterfront. And how do you really fit all of that along such a narrow strip of land? In terms of elevation, as we look at sea level rise, that this waterfront by 2100s really needs to be risen 3 to 5 feet higher than it is today. That would be just to protect against more frequent storms and sea level rise. But if we're talking about the next Hurricane Sandy by 2100, we're talking about flood defense, so it would be 15 to 18 feet higher than existing grades. So well over a story higher, high. So we all know that we can't just wall off the city. We can't abandon these assets. But unlike East River Park that we just saw, this waterfront has very, very little space. You can see in the graphic on the right side, there's maybe 20 to 40 feet outboard of the FDR that's on existing land. And so I'll step through a few diagrams that show the general idea of the project, and then share with you some visualizations of the current status of the design. So here we're seeing the conditions as they are today diagrammatically. So this is essentially near Wall Street. The pier there is the Wall Street Ferry Terminal and the FDR. So the core idea of the project is to really build out into the water and to claim space from the East River to create a resilient waterfront that integrates public amenities. So the first basic step here is that we need to extend the shoreline in order to provide that passive level of flood defense for our maritime assets. Then we really want to take advantage of this opportunity to create a multi-level waterfront that doesn't wall off people from the water, but creates a kind of new linear park that this area definitely deserves. And lastly, with this space in the water, there's opportunity to integrate amenity buildings and other assets along the waterfront to really activate the space and provide more of an opportunity to really view and experience the waterfront. And so what does that look like more technically? This is a section showing near Wall Street at what we would call a passive location of the waterfront. So at its max, the proposal is to extend up to 200 feet into the water and to create a linear park that is universally accessible, less than 5% grade, that would lead you up to an elevated promenade that would be on top of the flood defense. But what's important about this project, and you'll see in the images, is that we can't just raise the edge. We need to create 2 levels such that you always have this lower waterfront esplanade, and that's what you see on the right side. Along with this, the team is integrating stormwater detention measures, et cetera, within this landfill. At more technical locations, say at ferry terminals, et cetera, this is what the design would look like. So this is actually at Old Slip, where we have one of the subway tunnels going to Brooklyn. And so this is an area where we will have a bridging structure that spans over the subway, and also a series of floodgates that would provide direct access to the maritime facilities. You see here is that the plan proposes new amenity buildings on the dry side of the flood defense, as well as terminal buildings. And then outboard of that flood defense, you have an esplanade as well as an upgraded ferry facility. And so backing up, this is what the overall vision is like today. Again, we are at concept level design. We imagine over the course of several years, this design will shift and change. But there are a couple really large moves here that we want to talk about that we're excited about. The first of those is to reimagine the Staten Island Ferry and the Governor's Island Ferry as a combined terminal at the Whitehall Ferry Terminal site. So that's on the left side of the screen there. So the idea here is that if we're going to be building this flood defense, let's be forward thinking and build a new Grand Central for the waterfront, so to speak. The Battery Maritime building would be protected and adapted for new public uses. Heliport would be reconfigured and located in an area that will be not only suitable for heliport operations, but also be ready to receive freight and other waterborne deliveries as those kind of blue highway systems start to come online. Pier 11 becomes a much more expanded ferry terminal near Old Slip. Really, again, the idea here is to, if we're going to rebuild this waterfront, let's plan for future expansion and really embrace the harbor as a transportation asset. And then moving further north is really very important to embrace the historic character of the seaport area and ensure that access to these piers are maintained and really do have that kind of finger pier logic that is so natural to that historic district. So this is the waterfront as we see it more or less today. And this is a vision of what it could be in the future. Again, the new combined ferry terminal to the south, and the linear waterfront park as you move further to the north. This is a view looking at the Pier 6 heliport. So this is more or less on top of the Battery Maritime building looking north. And in this area, it was really important for us to create a passive green space adjacent to Veterans Memorial Plaza. And here's what that space could look like. So this is really an example of those sloping paths that I was showing in the previous graphic that would lead users up to an elevated promenade that would overlook the waterfront. Here's a view at Old Slip at the new city ferry terminal. This is kind of an example of this, what we would coined gateway entrances for this project. There would be 2 floodgates that would be stored within the elevated landscape such that on a day-to-day basis, users could walk directly to the waterfront here, knowing that this would be an area of very high circulation. And moving a little bit further north, we're looking toward Pier 15 and the seaport area today. And this gives you a sense of what this waterfront could become in the future. So it was really important for us not only to find ways to address all of those maritime access and facilities needs, but to find space along the waterfront that can be really more passive and more park-like and allow users to always get closer to the water. So this is one of those zones where we are imagining a kind of waterfront-facing amphitheater, if you will, so you can get closer to the water. And here's another image in the seaport area today, what it could be in the future. So what you're seeing here in the foreground is another floodgate opening at Fulton Street. So again, could walk directly to the waterfront. And then we have this elevated landscape that stores the flood defense in an integrated way. And I'll close out with this last image, essentially from on top of Pier 17, looking to the south. This gives you a sense of what this waterfront could feel like. Again, the idea is to really create a kind of bi-level space that integrates transportation assets, public open space, and other amenities along the waterfront. So with that, I'll pass it on.
All right, hello. My name is Ryan Connolly. I'm an architect at Thomas Pfeiffer Partners. Excuse me. And I'm talking about the South Battery Park City Coastal Resiliency Project, specifically Robert F. Wagner Jr. Park and Pavilion. I'm speaking from the role as an architect at Thomas Pfeiffer Partners, but I also want to acknowledge the larger project team, particularly AECOM, who's the prime on the project and was responsible for determining the flood alignment and many of the flood protection and storm surge protection features in the project. The previous two presenters had a very similar image to this, just to situate you. We're Battery Park City, we're at the lower left-hand side of the project, or of this map, and they'll tie into the projects to the east, which you just heard about. So why Battery Park City? I think, again, similar to the previous presentations, we're considering not just what happened in Sandy in 2012, but what's going to happen in the future. So this is a diagram showing the impact of a 2050s 100-year storm surge event in Battery Park City in Lower Manhattan. And you can see it's a very substantial level of concern with over 120 buildings which might be affected. Again, similar to some of the previous presentations, you can just see the scale of these coastal storm events. So on the far left-hand side, you have the relative scale of Hurricane Sandy in Battery Park City. And on the right-hand side, you have the anticipated storm surge from a 2050s 100-year event. So just to kind of zoom out for a second and consider the history of the site, not to really go into too much detail, but I think as a designer and an urbanist, it's interesting to consider the fact that Lower Manhattan, particularly Battery Park City, has always been somewhat of a contested shoreline. It's really a man-made landscape. It's not, the natural Manhattan shoreline, all the way back to Castle Clinton, which initially existed kind of out in the water. The Battery Park was extended to connect to it. In the mid-70s, the landfill from the original World Trade Center was used to extend out into the Hudson and to build, or to give us the land that became Battery Park City today. And on top of that landfill, the original Wagner Park wasn't completed until the mid-1990s, which featured a pavilion designed by Mikado Savetti and a landscape designed by Lori Olin. It's in that context that Hurricane Sandy comes in 2012, and shortly thereafter, in which Battery Park City Authority had to consider how to address the risk from future storm surge events in South Battery Park and in Wagner Park. The site presented several opportunities and constraints, probably mostly constraints. So we're kind of oriented in this image, looking at the southwest corner of Manhattan. You can see in the center there is the original Mikado Savetti Pavilion and Park. To the left is the Museum of Jewish Heritage. To the right is Pier A, which is one of the oldest piers in New York City. And to the right of that is the Battery with the historic Castle Clinton. And dashed in, you can see the Battery Park underpass, and further to the east, the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. So there's a number of different conditions here. And not to forget, in front of the pavilion, there's also a relieving platform. I think Matt spoke earlier about rebuilding the relieving platform on the Lower East Side. Here, again, it's that contested shoreline. The relieving platform is actually a man-made structure. It's not a natural shoreline, and that offers its own limitations, what can be built there. A number of different alignments were studied in the design phase. and I can kind of talk through each of these areas. And the project ended up being really 4 discrete flood barrier and storm surge prevention or security projects. One along the north edge of the battery, another at the Pier A Plaza, the third, which I'll talk in most detail about at Wagner Park, and lastly, around the existing Museum of Jewish Heritage. These diagrams on the right, I found when I was preparing for this presentation, and I think they really speak to one of the core issues in this project. The existing Wagner Park and Pavilion were a beloved community resource, and I think it was difficult, I think, for Battery Park City Authority and the community to understand and accept that the pavilion and the park had to change, and they had to be either completely remediated and rebuilt or removed entirely. So those diagrams on the right kind of show the relative impact of a few of these different flood alignment strategies. And I think it's interesting to consider that if you had to keep the pavilion and rebuild it as part of a flood wall, you may close 75% of the park at 90% of the cost for almost the same amount of time, but you're protecting the rear side of the park. You're not protecting the entire park. So versus closing the entire park for the same amount of time, a similar amount of cost, maybe slightly more cost, but ultimately you're protecting the entire park. You're providing a resource which is going to be more resilient in the future. It won't require periods of extended repair or replacement from future storm surge events. So ultimately, the alignment which was elected for Wagner Park was a new buried flood wall, which would be located as close to the water's edge as possible, just inside that limitation, that 90-foot offset zone from the relieving platform. A raised park, which would be about 10.5 feet higher than existing street level, and a new pavilion that kind of responds to the existing park and pavilion. I realize I'm already taking up a lot of time, so I'm going to go more quickly through this and focus on Wagner Park. So here it's just an axiometric diagram showing the location of that buried flood wall and the new park. And here it is in a construction photo. So you can see on the far left hand there is that corrugated sheet pile, which is the actual buried flood wall. To the right is the built-up landscape that cascades down to the relieving platform and the esplanade. And to the left, you can see the new pavilion under construction. So you can see here another aerial view of that, the flood wall, the new terrace landscape, the existing Museum of Jewish Heritage on the left-hand side, which had new flood barriers built right along the foundation towards the water's edge. And Pier A is off to the east side of the photo here. Here's a photo of the cistern under construction, which is on the dry side of the flood wall. And so all of the storm water is collected on the site, in this cistern and used for irrigation on site. So zooming into the pavilion, in our role as the architect, I think there was a couple major items that we had to respond to, one of which was the kind of design legacy of the beloved Mercado and Savetti Pavilion. So you'll see in the new site plan we look at momentarily that the site recreated the axial kind of alley approaches, these alley of trees that gather in a central collector space at the middle of the pavilion, which opens up to a view out to the Statue of Liberty. So a few images, pavilion on the right, obviously it's kind of these arches, this masonry construction. And we're also responding to the context of Battery Park City in the context of the Manhattan Harbor. So the left is one of the concept rendering of Battery Park City with all the brick buildings. On the right, we have Castle Clinton, which is very nearby, Castle Williams, which is across the way on Governor's Island. This kind of masonry, waterfront, harbor kind of castle fortification language, I think, was something that was kind of gave us a spark looking at the design. The new site plan, again, it recreates those allées, but now those allées are ramps that take you up to the new park level and turn you out to the Statue of Liberty. So here's a section. You can see the pavilion was pushed as far east in the new park as possible to maximize the green space and park area, which was one of the major demands of the community. And you can see how it's elevated up off the street level, which is on the lower right-hand side. I think one of the triumphs of the project is with a very similar footprint to the original pavilion, we're able to capture much more area. And part of that was by creating a basement space in this elevated park, which will be used both for the kitchen, for the new restaurant, as well as the kind of supports and maintenance staff for Battery Park City. Here are two plans. On the left-hand side, you can see the park level of the pavilion. Very similar to the historic pavilion, there's two wings. On the north is a community space, and on the south is a restaurant. And then on the right is the roof level plan, which offers a green roof and a publicly accessible roof terrace. Here are some of the elevations for the architects. I think one of the triumphs of the pavilion is that it changes as you move around it. It's got many different faces, you might say. Sustainability, the site was the 13th project nationwide to achieve WEDGE certification, and the pavilion is currently pursuing ILFI zero carbon certification. The major way which we're pursuing the zero carbon certification is through the reduction of the embodied carbon in the pavilion, which is accomplished primarily through the cement replacement in the architectural concrete. So we maximize cement replacement through the use of slag for a 37% reduction in embodied carbon. We went through many samples. These are just some of the samples that are in our office. You can see some of the bricks from the historic pavilion for comparison. Went through many full-scale mock-ups. I talked to these challenges after the event here. Here's just a few of the construction photos. We're fortunate to have a great concrete contractor and team who did an excellent job. Some more of the construction photos, which are kind of sublime to me to look at now. And then just a few of the photos of the final pavilion. The park opened in July or late June, and the pavilion actually opened last week. So you can go visit, go to the roof, use the restrooms. The community room will be opening later this year, and the restaurant early next year. So just a few photos of the park. So you can see the Museum of Jewish Heritage there to the north, the Esplanade, the terrace steps that take you up right over the flood wall to the new lawn and pavilion, and Pier A, which is off to the right of this image here. Here's just a rendering of what the restaurant may look like. So the interior rooms also have this red architectural concrete and offer these kind of large arched opening views out to the harbor beyond. And so that's it. I think right on time, hopefully. Thank you.
All right, my watch, is this working? My watch tells me we're not quite right on time, but I think it was worth it. What about you? Yeah, let's have another round of applause. These are three great projects. Okay, so with the approximately 40 minutes we have remaining, we're going to have moderator questions. So I've got a question for each of them, and hopefully this invites dialogue and inspires questions of your own. We're going to try to make sure that we dedicate at least the last 20 minutes, preferably more to your questions. So was it something I said? Everyone just peeled off. So I'm going to start with a question for you, Matt Potter, which is, Matt, please help us understand the value that Envision and WEDGE bring to large-scale resilience projects, particularly in terms of sustainability and community benefits. I think that's something we really want to emphasize here. And in the same breath, are there challenges or considerations in applying these systems that our audiences should be aware of? And I'll say, as an Envision SP for the last 10 years, and as somebody who launched the Port Authority's current sustainable infrastructure guidelines, which are aligned with Envision, I believe deeply in the system, but the systems are also sometimes challenging to bring into practice and challenging to administer.
Yeah, so with Esker, it's always nice to get recognition on the project. And from the community, they were really happy that the project got Envision and WEDGE awards. It was really great for myself, it was beneficial because it's one of the first large-scale projects that I worked on. So just getting to see the design process, get into the credit cover sheets. So for me personally, it was really good to go into it. But definitely for the community and getting that recognition. Some of the challenges were, so we did, as I mentioned during my presentation, it was a forensic application of Envision. So that means we didn't use it from the start of the design. We use it at 95% design completion. So it was challenging to do a little bit catch up, but there was great documentation done by others with the environmental impact statement. But there's also opportunities that we found as we're going through construction with the precast risers, our community engagement. We're actually now having a task group to start getting local hiring for construction opportunities and job opportunities in the park. So there's pros and cons, but it's been great working through the whole system in Envision and in Wedge.
So you mentioned that you applied it forensically, and this is not a scripted question, but and you were at about 95% when you did so. Were there any changes that you were able to make to the projects, marginal or substantial?
Yeah, so in particular, we made changes to the specs. So in the Envision manual, there are the sections for resource allocation. So we took some sections out of there and we actually able to put it into the spec package as opposed to just saying contractor must meet Envision requirements. We actually broke it out. You have to have a certain amount of biodiesel equipment, solar powered, and so on and so forth. So we were able to actually get it in towards that bid phase.
Excellent. And I found, ISI in particular to be excellent to work with. I'm not sure if you had direct dialogue with them, but I'll just push for that organization and Anthony Kane and crew. They're like the small, scrappy USGBC. I mean, they are a growing organization, but they don't have the global reach yet. And we found that they were willing to work with us hand in glove. They were willing to make reasonable adjustments. They were willing to bring their own staff to bear to help us navigate the process. So they're great people to work with. And I highly endorse the Envision system, which I think is currently being overhauled into version 4.
I was actually just up in Montreal. We had a workshop where it's in version 3, so we were working through it for version 4. And then international reach, they're actually having, I think, about 30 or so projects in Italy that are now going off the rating system. So it's starting to expand. And I think there's a representative almost nationwide now, not in every country, but in most regions. So I think they have a representative in China that they're working with now too.
I actually presented at the last Envision conference at Italy in Rome, except I didn't go to Rome because I had a last minute conflict. So I was in my office at the Port Authority at 4 a.m. presenting in Italy on Teams. But that's a story for happy hour, isn't it?
Yeah.
Would any of our other presenters like to opine on this issue? Obviously, there were strong sustainability elements interwoven in your project as well.
Yeah, I think to what you said about threading it through the specifications, I think especially for the architectural concrete, for example, to achieve that level of architectural finish and quality, but also the sustainability, we had to really have that be almost exactly step by step spelled out in the specifications. Otherwise, there's no way we could have achieved it. And other things that are left more open-ended to the contractors became real challenges. How do you meet this? Oh, well, I think I'm meeting it. So I think to get to that upper kind of level of compliance or exceeding compliance, I think it has to be done in the design phase. Absolutely.
Yeah. Have you also had opportunities during construction where hey, we can value engineer this to make it more sustainable, or any opportunities along those lines?
I don't think we've had any of those.
I think maybe in the context of the 5-day Seaport project, which is a little bit, not just a little bit, but very early stage compared to these other two projects, is that when you're thinking about sustainability, especially when a project where we're thinking about we need to build out into the water, create new space for resilience, then how much you build is really the sustainable question. It's just the more sustainable thing is to just build less. So you have to really be judgmental about what you rebuild, and then once you make that decision about that you're going to rebuild it, then you can start to do things and how you rebuild. But simply building less can sometimes be the more sustainable choice.
Wise words, less is more. And the next question, unless you have a follow-on remark for that, the next question is for you. So you mentioned that the 5-day resilience work also supports other city building objectives, including support to the recently released Blue Highways vision, which is very exciting and timely. What other transportation and urban systems opportunities are you tackling through this project? And can you talk about how you are promoting strategies that achieve multiple goals? And if there are conflicts or dissonance in that, and how are you navigating them? And I think that was 5 questions, but hopefully all, in the service of one theme, which is these are complicated projects that need to provide amenities to their communities, connections, and that's honestly why I think that's why we're doing this at the Center for Architecture, because these are not just big dumb flood walls, right? These are flood protection measures that provide community benefit that need to perform above and beyond a pure flood protection role.
Yeah, and related to the previous comment about the decision of when to build and when not to build, I think the concept that you saw and the idea of rebuilding Whitehall Ferry Terminal was not a decision that was taken lightly. This is a very constrained and complex area with the FDR going underground and the Battery Underpass with that building essentially spanning over it, and there really wasn't space to build a flood wall. And in that area, we looked at so many different alternatives that would be, let's say, a lighter touch that might just rebuild part of the building. Let's put a flood wall partially through the building. And as we continue to study it, we found that there are 2 to 3, maybe 10 problems you could solve at the same time by just rebuilding that terminal. One is that you can create a new resilient terminal that is integrated, flood defense is integrated within the building. You can create an expanded ferry system for the Staten Island ferry service. You can relocate the Governor's Island ferry service to an adjacent building, so you're really creating a kind of transportation hub. And then on top of that, there's an opportunity to really rethink Peter Minuet Plaza just upland of the building and create a stronger open space connection between the Battery and the Waterfront North. And so while that decision wasn't taken lightly by the city, it's on the order of $1 billion investment, we saw it as just a really great opportunity to just link all together all of these different elements into a more cohesive urban design.
Excellent. Matt Potter, maybe I'll invite you in the context of Esker, obviously a large flood protection project, but one that is also fundamentally centered on community benefit, on transportation in the sense that it encourages active transportation, walking, ped, bike, things like that. Can you talk a little bit more about how those issues were interwoven in the project, how any sort of key decisions or trade-offs you had to make kind of in navigating the nexus between flood protection and public amenity and connection?
Yeah, I'll try to be as sensitive as possible. There was a lot of community engagement meetings. In that EIS I mentioned, there was about, I think, 4 different alternatives. So there's a no-build alternative. And we went through all these different, not we, but the design team that went through all the different iterations, meeting things like I'm sure everyone has seen the Big U, where there's proposals to bury the FDR. They even had that flood wall proposal or just a wall along the FDR, all different types of projects. So the real beneficial was keeping that park open throughout the construction process, always having something available for the community. And they also were making sure that it was pedestrian friendly to the community. It wasn't just, the park's here, but you can't get to it. So we have a really robust community engagement team. And we have our own management tool, HNTB does, called PIMA. So if someone sees something and they don't like it, they can punch it into their phone. And we have a couple community liaisons, and they'll get this information. So they can then address it or escalate if it needs to be, or say, hey, no, like this, you can go here, you can go that. So really trying to be as sensitive to the community as possible.
And maybe a thread from that response that I want to pull is that obviously we didn't talk a whole lot about phasing, but phasing is so complicated but so important, obviously. So there's an opportunity and a constraint in phasing. Obviously, Russ and I know this well through airport redevelopments. Building a new set of airline terminals while you maintain full operations is maddeningly, like there's some mad genius in a back room with MS Project working through that. But can you talk a little bit more about some of the challenges and opportunities relating to project phasing, either at a very formative stage for Matt Stout or for projects that are virtually complete?
Maybe just to kind of double down on the Staten Island ferry issue, was that when we were looking at it, and I think like you were just mentioning, it's not easy to rebuild a terminal and maintain service at the same time. And so an important land use decision that we encouraged the city to pursue was to acquire the Coast Guard site adjacent to the ferry terminal. And with that site, what you're able to do is to start build at least a portion of that terminal first while the original terminal remains operational, and then knock down the old terminal once you have something that works on the other side. So just at least even at the early stages is trying to make space for building the new while you're still using the old is very important.
Yeah, it's like so phasing. So for PA2 is done ahead of schedule. Like for me being the Envision lead, it was always trying to get field staff to give me things. They're like, no, we're trying to get things done on time. So not happy they didn't get me things on time, but happy that it was given back to the community on time. And then just being on schedule for that PA2, getting it open early, I think is really just beneficial just to start to give things back as soon as possible to the community.
In the case of the South Battery Park City project, I think I spoke to this a little bit when I showed the diagram with the different alignment strategies, but a decision was made to close the entire park to hopefully for the shortest amount of time possible, but to deliver the maximum public benefit. So to create a new flood alignment which would protect the entire area versus a flood alignment which would protect only a small section of the park, but results in a relatively similar amount of closure and a much reduced use during that time period. So I think in the scale of our project, the decision was made to do it all at once and then to reopen it, as quickly as possible.
Well, you're an expert in teeing up the final question, which is for you to start with. So this is this project, obviously, as you were very forthright in expressing, impacted a well-loved community amenity in pursuit of a greater good. So, can you further unpack? I guess you've done some unpacking, but can you further unpack some of the difficult choices that had to be made in relation to working with existing facilities, including some considerations around what to keep and what to remake?
Yeah, so in preparing for this talk, I think I was looking back at a lot of the early decisions that were made in the early presentations. And I started to ask myself, what is really the role of the architect, especially in our case where we're the architect of the pavilion in this larger project, not responsible for the entire flood alignment, this huge, billion-dollar infrastructure project. So many of these decisions about where to put the flood alignment, when not to close a park or a public amenity, whether or not to keep the existing pavilion are made so far beyond the level of the architect. But ultimately, in working with the owner and the rest of the design team, the architect, we find ourselves, I think, as the bleeding edge. We're out there at the community board meetings. We're helping to explain why what's happening is happening. Yeah, I'm trying to make this sound noble. I think some people have had some different experiences. But I think ultimately we're the ones who put an image to it. We put the design and the drawings and the renderings and visually explain to the community what's happening and why it's happening. And so I think there is a sense of, even though we're not making all the big decisions, the big picture decisions, I think we have a responsibility and a stewardship to do what's best for the community and try to maximize their resources.
Do our other panelists have perspective on that issue that they'd like to share, or shall we turn to audience? Actually, this brings us just about on track. So do we have a roving mic? Yes, we do. So I'd like to invite audience questions.
Hi, going back to Whitehall, is that an open issue at this point? Is the city doing anything to move it along?
Is it an open issue? Well, the city's embraced the concept, and let's just say there's a significant funding gap, not only with the entire project, but particularly that asset. But there is still time to work this out. We have a decade or two that the facility can operate as it is now. But just to go back to that, we wouldn't be showing those images if the city hadn't embraced that future vision.
Hi, my name's Cullen Brown. I work as a tour guide, and I have a very specific question about two things related to the gates. Could you describe the mechanism of how they swing and roll, and what's up with the asphalt that's in the track?
I guess I can answer that since we. No comment on the asphalt. The original design did have a cover plate that I guess for some reason the screws were hard to maintain. But yeah, so in the Esker project, and this is similar to some of the concepts for the Friday Seaport project, is that those gates, there's two types. There's a swing gate and a roller gate. You saw some of those images, and they just act like very, very large steel doors. In the case of the rolling gate, it rolls on that track, and there's a seal plate that drops down. One of the things that you see in the Esker project is that those gates are stored and can be seen on a day-to-day basis. They're just right in front of the flood defense. And what we were trying to do for the Friday Seaport project is to really find a way where that can actually be stored within the landscape, so that you wouldn't see it on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, it's different in different projects, but the Esker project, it's 100% manual. So the swing gates, one person can just walk up. I've been on site just swinging the gates open and closed. Rolling gates are a little bit different story. They have a winch, and there's a winch mount, and you crank those. And so this is kind of, I don't want to say old school, but it's very much like the mechanisms that you see, say, in the Louisiana Delta. And the idea there is that you can have electric mechanisms, et cetera, but if those mechanisms fail, you're always going to need to be able to do it manually. So that's what you're seeing across the city is, even if it's actuated mechanically, there's some sort of manual backup.
Thank you, Selmata. I have a couple of questions. The first one is about the Waterfront Code Commission, and the second series of questions, you might say, is kind of revisiting the early phases on the East River Park. So I'm a member of the Waterfront Code Commission. I'm wondering if there's anybody else here that is on that committee. Anyone else on the Waterfront Code Committee?
Any hands for Waterfront Code Commission?
Nobody? No raised hands. Well, okay.
Nobody here to correct you.
Well, I would just say that after a couple of years of working on the new code for all 520 miles of waterfront in New York City alone, we're finally coming to the end, and I'm wondering if there was any impact at all on your work regarding any new codes that will be implemented with this new work. Has not been interacted with you? Okay. The other part of my questions, going back to revisit what happened in East River Park, because living in this area of Greenwich Village, we've got a lot of waterfront that is very precious, and it's restricted, as you know. I really appreciate all of the restrictions that you've had to deal with in all of these other areas. I mean, it's tremendous, and you can't, for all that restriction, you've done a great job. I visited all these parks many times and I've written about it, but they're great for, oh, suddenly I have a mic. They're great, but revisiting those early decisions from the community viewpoint, the community input was ignored because they were very vocal about not wanting the existing park and thousands of trees and mature trees destroyed. And the option that you talk about of putting the flood wall at FTR would have saved all that. So you could have still had the bridges going over the highway and connecting the neighborhood with the park. So we have similar problems along the Hudson River Park. And I don't know if any of you are already involved looking at that, but certainly your experience and all of the work that you've done, hopefully will influence what's done at Hudson River Park. And I'm very concerned about that. I'm wondering if any of you can comment on what you think are some of the solutions for an area like Hudson River Park. Thank you.
That's a really tough question. Maybe for some of those that, just for context, I'll just reference, you were talking about the redesign of East River Park and how, if some of you aren't familiar, an early design option that the team was moving forward with in East River Park was to build the flood wall adjacent to the FDR and attempt to have a lighter touch on the park. This flood wall would be next to the FDR and in very close proximity and sometimes right over some critical power lines that you would literally have to hand excavate and dig and build a tunnel around those power lines. And I think maybe related to the theme that you're talking about, the lesson learned through that process was understanding that sometimes a light touch solution is kind of held on to for too long. And it became really apparent that there was a lot of construction risk in building the flood defense in such close proximity to those power lines. And also that in reality, a lot of the trees in East River Park were either going to suffer from salt inundation of their lower elevation, or that they would just have to be removed anyway because nearly 50% of the park was being regraded regardless. And so finally the decision was made, and it was a hard one by the city, and they certainly did not manage the public messaging very well. But the decision was made that the better pathway forward is to just rebuild the entire park and raise the entire park. And so I think that maybe that's always the kind of hard decision that needs to be made early in a project, even in, say, the Hudson River Park, is that can you do that light touch solution, or is it better to just embrace rebuilding that entire waterfront? I think Wagner Park is a little bit of a similar example as well. You might have.
Yeah, I think I kind of was running out of time, so I didn't have a chance to talk about the other aspects of the South Battery Park City Resiliency Project, but I think throughout the project, various approaches were demonstrated. So for example, on the north side of the historic Battery Park, it is one of these kind of lighter touch approaches where the flood wall was built very close to Battery Place, about as close as it could be. Some trees were still lost, but the vast majority of the historic mature trees in the Battery were preserved. Due to some of the other constraints in Wagner Park, we weren't able to do that. But on kind of the flip side, at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, the flood barrier was also, again, built very closely to the existing museum. And so all of those trees, or many of the trees in Wagner Park to the north, were maintained. But what Matt was describing, there is a risk involved in that, whereas those are now on the wet side of the flood prevention system. So, if there is another sandy or super sandy type event, those trees may become inundated with salt water. They may be lost ultimately anyways. So.
We've got another question back there.
And I think for Esker, they're replanting more trees than are there now. They're obviously not mature trees, and then the existing trees that were removed, they used for mulching and other. I think they actually put some of it into the park landscape by the Delancey Street Bridge. So they tried to reuse as much as they could, sustainability-wise.
Great presentations, thank you. Rick Bell, formerly DDC, formerly here. I have a question about funding. One of the comments made a moment ago was about uncertainty about partial funding, and I think the city the city limits posting today about funding for financial district Seaport is very relevant. So I'd like to specifically ask about where the money is coming from, $5.7 billion, and the likelihood of finding it, and continuity between administrations, both municipal and federal, given the recent elections. What the hell's going to happen?
Those are great questions, and luckily I can just punt that question. I am a consultant, not a representative of the city, but they are good questions that you should ask your your electeds on that. So,
Artfully done. May we have the next?
Excuse me,
gentleman?
I got here a little bit late, but I'm asking a question about the initial conceptual regarding the big U and mitigation from both the actual ocean and the Hudson River, the two-directional thing. Because we were told ocean rise would be about, in fact, precisely 6'3" I believe, to 2050. And so the elevations here are obviously critical. There's a lot of new landscaping, new park for, let's say, the residential. And the thing that always concerns me is, let's say, a comparison between this and Venice, where the architecture by initial design integrates with the edge of the water. Here it's obviously a different approach, which is logical from an engineering point of view. The consideration for architecture to again approach the water, whatever the level is at a various point with these increasing events, is what I'm wondering about in terms of the cross-sectional options and how they were really reviewed with the community in depth and the community given a very wide definition. I'll just say, resilient district design, we've been working with the Rockaway community. So the initial mitigation, the Rockaway Peninsula and the open water entry area from the ocean represents, actually we're 60% of that combined lineal. And so the question is, was that considered? And also the inundation from Hudson, I'm sure it was, and I didn't hear that, but that plus at the northern two tips of the U, I've always been wondering what happens at that point with the water. The elevation of the water, where does it go?
there's a lot of questions there. Maybe I'll start with the last one, and if there's something. But I think your initial question, your last question was, where does the water go as it moves up? Maybe taking a step back, all of these projects that you saw, they all have what's called independent utility. So they usually tie into high grounds, so they protect an enclosed compartment, so each project can be built independently. So for example, the Fidei Seaport project, there would be a tie-in to the flood wall would go upland in the battery on the south side, and then it would also go upland at the Brooklyn Bridge. And the where does the water go if it gets displaced is that the engineers always model the flow of the water to ensure that any of that flood water that you're holding back doesn't just negatively impact an adjacent area. And I think what you typically find is that the body of water is so large that it doesn't impact the neighboring areas, say like Brooklyn, for example.
Channeling all the coastal engineers I know, I think they would concur with you. The ocean is effectively an infinite body of water, and diverting it effectively makes no difference. If we're talking about riverine flooding, that's a different ball of wax.
You have one right here.
Okay.
All right. Hey, thanks for the presentation. My name's Nikhil. I'm a NYU journalism student, so my question's not going to be as technical as some of the other ones, but I was curious about, can you all hear me? Okay. I was curious about the global influence on some of the prototypes and the sort of execution on some of these flood mitigation plans. I've seen a lot of the strategy here was based on the strategy used in the Netherlands. So I was curious if there was data used from other examples that was sort of instrumental in sort of executing on these projects.
Well, it all kind of stemmed from the big U, right, which is by Bjork. That was the original starting point for a lot of it. So I think that was, like in your experiences, was that the basis for a lot of what we've used in your designs?
Yeah, and the technology is relatively flexible, but in the say for example for the ESCR project, the ESCR project is aiming to become FEMA certified. So that would mean that legally the floodplain would be changed based off of the flood defense system. And so by doing that, then the engineering of that flood defense system needs to follow certain Army Corps of Engineers requirements. And so that's really what happens in the US. And so what you see, a lot of the infrastructure you see in ESCR is really, I think, inherited from some technologies that are proven in the Mississippi Delta, for example. The certifying engineer, Arcadis, the lead engineer also led the rebuild of the levees in New Orleans. But then that as these projects advance, then I think that more innovative ways of dealing with the flood defense have been proposed. For example, near your building, I believe there's a glass top to a flood wall, for example. And so, we're just continually finding ways to better integrate these elements into the landscape.
Yeah, I also can't speak to many of the technical aspects of it, but in my own experience being around this project for several years now, I remember, between Hurricane Sandy when our project started, there were a lot of proposals in the media about building, giant floodgates beneath the Verrazano Bridge at the mouth of New York Harbor, for example. So I think of those types of things being on the kind of nationwide scale, of something like in the Netherlands. Whereas in New York City, we've had to approach it in these kind of extremely local interventions, because of the nature and the density of New York. So I do think that it's presented its own challenges that each of these projects have had to respond to.
Hi.
And one thing I was going to say, just to piggyback here, speaking of community amenities, I mean, effectively, if you get those flood walls FEMA certified, they demap those districts and they no longer have to carry flood insurance. That is a massive community amenity that I think has not been talked up enough. That's tens of millions of dollars in flood insurance premiums, public and private, every year.
Hi. Also, don't forget the city self-insures, so that's why it's really important to do the FIDI Seaport segment. But my question was, could you talk about taking down the FDR south of Brooklyn Bridge and how it could actually make it easier maybe to build the flood protection system? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's definitely something that the team explored when you're looking for space to site flood defense. The first place you want to look is on land before you start building out into the water. But I think one issue that is important to think about is we've been talking a lot about should a project be dependent on rebuilding this asset or that asset, and then how complex will a project get if you just have to rebuild absolutely everything. And it was decided that it was important for the FIDI Seaport project to, let's say, be decoupled from what happens with the FDR and let the future of the FDR kind of move on its own track. And then the FIDI Seaport project can kind of move on its own track, because if you start to really, let's say, bundle together a lot of these dependencies, you might just weigh down the whole project where it can never get built. And so that was one of the kind of, in planner speak, we tend to call it decoupling that was chosen to do there. But the FIDI Seaport project would never preclude the removal of the FDR, and actually, it was, as a part of the proposal, we're proposing to extend the Battery Park underpass in front of the Battery Maritime building to create a plaza there. We'll kind of cross our fingers and hope that highway gets taken down from other mechanisms besides this project. But
I wanted to go back to the gates for a second. I think in a lot of engineering classes, you're always taught about the importance of redundancy and second lines of defense and so forth. So I appreciate that particularly at ESCR, the gates are going to be operated every year and checked and well maintained and so forth. But in the event that, hopefully it never fails, and hopefully we never even have to use the gates, but should one of the gates fail, what's the intended second line of defense?
That's a good question. So part of that testing, so they're still finalizing. So they call it the operations and maintenance manual. I'm not sure, but maybe there is a section in there where they're addressing that second line of defense. Maybe if they start to see any deterioration in the flood wall, maybe they'll replace it. Matt, did you happen to see anything like that during the design process?
No, but again, a lot of times we're put in positions to speak on behalf of the engineers. And
yeah.
So that I think that maybe that might be a little bit above my pay grade. So.
Yeah, similarly, I can't really, I'm not an engineer that designed these, but I know in the Wagner Park project, for example, in the area beyond the project, many of the manhole covers were enhanced with these kind of lockdown covers and also the utility manhole covers. So I think that's also addressing, the potential for increased rainfall events as well, not just storm surge events. So I think there is this added level of protection and infrastructure that happened kind of in the entire context of the project, not just the flood barriers.
I have opinions on this matter myself, but as we have 3 minutes left, let's focus on questions. We can take 2 more as long as they're succinct.
Hello, can you hear me? So I'm Simon Lee with Matt on HNTB. I also used to work for Bjarke Ingels Group, so I'm speaking from both ends. For the students here, the 100-year flood means there's a 1% chance any given year that it will flood this point. So sometimes you see 100-year flood happen twice a year because it's 1% chance. 1 out of 100 is 1%. It's 1%. So the 100-year flood line means very little now because the flood line could go over that any given year, many times a year. And then to the gentleman who speak about the water displacement, where the water go when it floods, the original Bjarke plan in the Big U was that all this landscape you see in Barrie Park City, the landscape and the park is meant to be a detention pond. So all this landscape, all this soil will hold the flood water. And when the water line recedes, it will release the water slowly so it doesn't collapse the draining system. So, and then I want to...
Can I encourage you to ask a question, given that we've got 1 minute left?
No question.
He's helping explain.
Come and hang out with us afterward. We're glad to talk. Just want to make sure everyone gets their questions.
Thank you. I know this panel is specific to Lower Manhattan, so apologies for taking us elsewhere, but maybe it would be a nice note to end on. But I was wondering if you can tell us about upcoming waterfront developments in other boroughs, and if that's too wide of a topic, maybe we can focus on Brooklyn specifically. And I hope that when I say, or I wonder and hope that when I say waterfront, that extends to also include canals and bays and channels. So thanks. And how would those developments, how are you making sure those developments are guarding up for climate change?
We can definitely address that in 30 seconds. No, I mean, one thing to look at just off the top of my head is Red Hook Coastal Resiliency Project in Brooklyn. And I think it'll be interesting to see how that ties into the Brooklyn Marine Terminal comprehensive redevelopment, the new neighborhoods that will be there, the new reactivated maritime zone. So, I mean, the project is designed, it's FEMA funded, but obviously there are several community tie-ins there. Any other sort of up-and-coming flood protection projects in other boroughs that folks would like to name drop?
I mean, similar to what you're saying about Red Hook is that we're also working with EDC on the Brooklyn Marine Terminal plan. So we're really trying to take some of the lessons learned from the FIDA Seaport and Esker and these other projects and say that if you do have an opportunity to redevelop a sizable portion of land in Brooklyn, then how do you integrate flood defense on day one and make it as a part of the spatial plan? And that's what we're currently working on.
Fantastic. I think we are at time, and I don't know about the rest of you, but I will mill around, and I'll look forward to additional conversation and questions. I think just to close it out, like an existential question is, not to pander to you folks, but why are architects involved in major coastal resilience projects, I think we got our answers here today. It's because the involvement of architects and other disciplines working together in an integrated and holistic way bring amenity, bring connection, bring public realm improvements that we need in New York City and in other urban environments out of these coastal protection projects. So can we have a round of applause for our presenters? Thank you very much for coming out.